Greetings, everyone. I'm Scott Rodell here at the Great River Taoist Center, home to the Academy of Chinese Swordsmanship. This is the last quick little update on the sword giveaway. It's this Sunday, the drawing, so you still have a chance. If you haven't already registered to win, follow the link below. Follow the instructions to get extra points, extra entries by liking, sharing, emailing it to your friends, all those good things. If you already are in, you can do those things again and get more entry points. So up until the drawing, up until Saturday, everybody has a chance to win. Now, some people have been asking me, how did I come to design this sword? Well, it's kind of an interesting story. 20-some years ago, when I started test cutting, nobody was doing any kind of cutting with Chinese swords. In fact, you often heard people say that Chinese swords didn't cut well, you couldn't cut with them. But that didn't seem right to me. I mean, there's lots of cuts in all of the different forms, whether it's a quick, powerful Liao cut or the quick little P cut. There's certainly plenty of cutting actions going on in forms and in swordplay. So that didn't really make sense to me. And my teacher, Wang Yanyin, had talked about how in the past, people just gathered with different materials they had locally and made a caoren, a grass man, to practice cutting on, to make sure their techniques really worked. And I thought, that's something we really ought to be doing, because if you don't use a tool to do what it's designed to do, how can you say you really understand how to use that tool? So I thought test cutting is something that's really important. We really need to bring back into Chinese swordsmanship. So I started to do it, and I was out cutting different things. Of course, the word got out, other people got interested, and I'd get calls from people asking me about how to practice and how to get started. One person had called and said, you know, I'm interested in doing this. I want to get a sword. Would you test this certain sword for me? And I said, sure, if you want to buy one and send it to me, I'd be happy to. So a few days later, I get a call from Barry Ross, the then president of CAS, one of the largest distributors of swords here in the United States, particularly for Hanwei. And he'd said, we had a client call and say, they want us to send you a sword, you're going to do some cutting with it, Chinese sword. And I said, yeah, that's true, I'm going to test it out for him. He said, oh, well, are people doing that? Or do people actually do test cutting with Chinese swords? And I said, well, yeah, it's just starting, it's just beginning to come back. And you know, we're doing a lot of that work here at Great River Taoist Center. And he was like, well, I hadn't heard about this, I didn't know about it. And after we chatted for a while, he's like, oh, he hadn't heard of the Great River Taoist Center, but he said, oh, you're the Scott Rodell with 7 Stars Trading Company. And I said, yeah, that's me. And he said, would you be interested in designing a cutting sword for us, a Chinese cutting sword? And I said, certainly, because they didn't have one at the time. And what he asked for was a sword that would really hold up to tough cutting. He said, a lot of people are going out just cutting whatever there is, you know, trying to cut down a tree, whatever. Really hard targets, and he asked me to design a sword with a really strong edge geometry. So what I did is I went to work, I got out old blades, used the contouring measuring tool, and I measured really thick kind of blades to see what would really stand up, you know, and find that. And designed the sword, gave them very detailed drawings, all the contours of the edge geometry, sent it off to China. They sent me back a sword, and it really was a strong edge. You could really have cut down a tree with it, but it didn't cut soft targets well because it had an edge geometry kind of like an axe. It was very thick, not very wide, but very thick. And so it was a very strong edge, but consequently wasn't particularly sharp. So we went back to the drawing board, and I was able to consult with a number of swordsmiths, in particular Paul Champagne. It was a really great help. And we worked back and forth. And quite honestly, I wasn't sure we would hit the right point. An edge that would slice nicely through things like plastic bottles, which people like to practice on. Very easy target, a great target to test your work on, a great target for beginners, but not a difficult target to cut through. But it's very flexible, so you need a fairly sharp edge to get it to slice through it. On the other hand, an edge that's very thin, very sharp, like a razor blade, is not very strong. So you have to try to find that sweet point. And I wasn't really sure that it existed, but we experimented, consulted with swordsmiths, and we were really lucky. We hit exactly this nice lenticular shape that was thick enough in the center and tapered just right to the cutting edge that it would stand up to cutting hardwood, bamboo, even dried bamboo. It gets really tough and hard and would still cut the soft targets very nicely, slice through them. So thanks to all those people who helped me out. Unfortunately, my good friend Paul Champagne has passed on, but honestly, without his help, I don't know if I would have gotten it just right. His wealth of knowledge was indispensable. So that's the story of how I created this sword. The fittings overall are all based on antique examples. This style of guard goes back to the Ming Dynasty, but was used well into the Qing. One thing that's a little bit different than earlier swords is the use of this suspension band. They didn't really do that during the Ming Dynasty. However, they did do that during the Qing. And that's the same style of suspension band that was also used on the sabers in the Chinese Dao. And so it was adopted from the Chinese saber to the Chinese Jian during the Qing period. And we went with that because we knew later on we wanted to make a cutting down and to sort of have them look nice together as a set. We wanted to use the same suspension band. So that's why we used this, why I chose to go with the suspension band instead of the more typical 3 plates that you see down the Jian. So, good luck in the contest. Don't forget to like and share and follow on Instagram and all that good stuff. And I hope you win a nice Jian. Till next time, thanks and 再见.